there's a director, there's the person who's in charge, there are students, there are professors who teach. And such a professor now is with us today. Mr. Stipe professor of philosophy, who is teaching at the university in Zagreb and Mostar. He will speak to us about the relationship of science and faith. When we spoke about this, what is to be said, we decided that it will not be classically the way that a professor would give the talk, where there will be an exam, but a simple talk from the heart that the professor prepared for you and for us. Welcome. Dear youth, and you also who are older, who have come throughout all the corners of the world here to Medjugorje, I greet you, and with you I share the joy that I'm able to speak to you about faith and science. This is the year of faith. And it seems that for several centuries, including our time, is a time of science. That I would like to speak about faith and science, but also about other things that are connected to it, like philosophy, theology, religion, and the like. What is faith? Every one of us has his own impression, experience of faith. To believe is not just an expression of some kind of faith or belief. In a Christian sense, to believe means more than that. To believe someone in God as a personal being, to whom man, in a literal sense, gives him, surrenders himself. That is why faith is a personal act, where a person, we could say, surpasses himself in surrendering himself to another in whom he has complete trust. That act is not completely rational. It is also not irrational. It is super-rational. That is why faith is something eccentric, because the one who believes is himself, liberates himself from being the center of everything. A real believer, thus, cannot be egocentric. He cannot be selfish. He cannot be the one who is only turned to himself. Such a person cannot be a true believer. Many people today proclaim themselves atheist, as agnostic, but also as believers. What do they justify this by? Some also try to use science. Some scientists try to convince us that what is not known to science does not actually exist. What is science? Science can be defined as a research of the material world, that what is tangible, and to experimentally verify it, and to seek the laws by which the world functions. The power of the science comes from its knowledge of the laws that rule in nature. And from their application to technology and technique. Thus, science has a method that is used to be able to come to scientific truth, which is called, in parenthesis, as certain. It seems that there is a recipe for finding science. They call this scientific method. However, this is one of the dogmas of science. Up to now, nobody has found a recipe of how to come to scientific truth. On the basis of the empirical, inductive manner, it is impossible logically to come to an absolute certain truth. The truth that is gained in such a scientific way is more or less believable, but not essentially and absolutely certain. Science thus is not exact. In the way that oftentimes it is said that it is. Positivistic scientists and philosophers were convinced that empirically inductive manner would bring to a better understanding of the world, and that science, at a given moment, would come to possessing the absolute truth. The greatest scientists of the 20th century pointed to the fact that this is not the most appropriate way of thinking. Albert Einstein, for example, emphasized that real knowledge in the knowledge of the world came to the inductively opposite manner. Science comes to how the world functions, how we come to that conclusion, but it does not answer why. Why are things as they are? That is the question of the meaning and the purpose. Why are natural laws such? Why are there some constant quantities in nature? Why is the characteristics of the most smallest particles in such a way? Etc. Science responds to the question, how? So, for example, the theory of evolution describes how the living world evolved, but it can say nothing about why it evolved this way. Neither does the theory of evolution has anything to do with the fact whether there's God or not. To the question of why, philosophy and theology, religion give answers, and not science. In difference to science, philosophy also speaks about other things that surpass daily experience. That is why the dictionary that the philosophy uses is unfamiliar and is not known and understandable in ordinary use. Philosophy speaks also about God as a transcendental being, a being that surpasses our experience and knowledge. This is not a matter of religiosity, of a religious understanding of God, because atheists and agnostics also speak about God, but they do not have to name Him or call Him by that name always. They do not have to necessarily speak about or think about God of any particular religion. It is why oftentimes it is said that it is worthy to differentiate the God of philosophy and the God of faith. Or philosophy, as also theology, tries to come to know God in a natural way by the natural power of reason. Faith tries to know Him in a supernatural way. That is why faith and religion must be differentiated. Faith is an interior, personal relationship towards a transcendental being, towards God, and religion are the institutions and the given in which the unity and community is seen in relationship to God. Atheists say that theology is not science, knowledge. For theology to come to know, we need another science, and that is mathematics. No one will come into question, bring into question that mathematics is a science, not just any kind of science, but the strictest and most trustworthy of all the science. We can ask ourselves, what kind of a science is this? What kind of beings or subjects does it cover? The most frequent answer will be that mathematics are a natural science, but they are not, because it does not involve natural aspects, but geometry, geometrical structures, mathematical structures that are not natural but abstract. They are not tangible, they are not visible. Our senses cannot touch them. Is theology also not in similar position as mathematics? And its subject, God, is not subject to senses. John, the evangelist, says that God has never been seen by anyone. Then why does math as a science is not questionable to atheists, but theology is? The relationship between theology and science, faith and reason, is especially actual in today's time. Still, there is the prevailing of the superficial understanding of that relationship. Oftentimes it is said, the more knowledge, less faith, and vice versa. In that sense, some are convinced in that the defeat of science will make faith superficial and religion will disappear, and that science will replace it. From that we could conclude that faith is actually an obstacle to reason and science. Unfortunately, this is how some believers also think. Some consider that someone who believes more is less reasonable. In fact, that they are irrational or unreasonable. So an American scientist, an atheist, gave the faithful believers an advice that when they enter church, they could leave their reason outside of the church. This is a complete misunderstanding of faith and an offense to the believers. German physicist Max Born from the 20th century said, "Those who say that in research of science they say that man is to be an atheist must be pretty stupid. Faith is not a blind acceptance of something that nobody knows about without questions. Knowledge is an integral part of faith, without which faith would be only superstition. The component of knowledge and faith is essential, and a believer must never renounce his reason and the critical examination. It is up to the believer to investigate the depth of God." A unusual and for maybe even heretical question can be asked: is there faith in science? Even though many scientists, especially atheists, say that in science there is absolutely no faith, but only that it is sown on proof, it is not correct. Scientists accept certain presuppositions that scientifically cannot be proven. Somebody has to believe in them. Scientists are convinced that the subject of investigation of natural science is some form of a world where order rules, not a lack of order. Without that, what is not proven, but only presupposed, conviction, science could not even exist. It investigates those aspects that evolve towards the unchangeable, whether discovered or undiscovered laws that are called natural laws. No one doubts in those laws, even when they are not familiar to us. Albert Einstein on one occasion said that in the very end, believing in the fundamental, all-encompassing laws also rests on some kind of faith. Everyone who is seriously involved in science becomes convinced that natural laws discover the existence of a spirit far superior than man, and must feel humble when we are faced with our limited, humble possibilities. That is why Einstein tells us that knowledge of science brings to religion. But also it is philosophical for the human reason, mind, to be able to come to know such an orderly world. These assertions are not scientific in themselves, but they are a priori and they are metaphysical. On these and other convictions or dogmas, science rests. And even science themselves are not aware of the dogmatic character of science, Which dogmatism they oftentimes ascribe to faith and theology. The sciences, in fact, are all believers, but they're not aware of that, or they don't want to admit it. Atheism is only some kind of faith. Atheists truly are great believers because they firmly believe that God does not exist. Maybe even they believe in that more than believers believe that He does exist. For this, we have the example of the modern scientists and atheists of today, whom we know well. But one or the other cannot scientifically show God. If science could prove God scientifically, then science would be above Him. But God, looking at philosophically, theologically, is above all, even above all science. Therefore, all theoretical complaints of atheistic scientists must fall away, that faith and church block science. To the contrary, science as we know today has come forth from Christianity and developed in the framework of the Western Christian environment. It is the inheritance of Christianity. The old Christian philosophers became known to Europe thanks to the schools of the Middle Ages that are Christian, where not only Christian theologians were studied, but above all, and mostly those who were pre-Christian. The Middle Ages of European Christianity is a historic period where order rules, and the approach, the world is rationalistic, because for everything was trying to be explained through reason. The source of such rationalistic thinking is good to seek in scholastical logic and theology. Today we know how scholastics are darkened. God has created an orderly, not a disorderly world, and the discovery of its laws on the basis of reason is the beginning of the investigation of nature, the beginning of natural science. The Christianity of the Middle Ages is very cunning of connecting the way of thinking of the old Greeks and the civilization of Christianity. The best expression of that are Saint Benedict, the protector of Europe, and Gregor the Great, and the Benedictine monasteries, where his spirituality and knowledge are combined. Orat et labora, work and pray. In the Middle Ages already, at the beginning of the New Age, there were also the discoveries of the discoveries that were very important for Christianity and came from Christian thinking and mentality. This kind of thinking is characteristic of science and is the source of European spirit. In such a spiritual environment, it was possible for science to grow and develop, and it's not even strange that science developed in European Christian culture and not in other cultures outside of Europe. If the Christian Middle Ages are the Dark Ages, as afterwards it was called by others, and today even we hear this expression, then science should be called dark, which would be completely wrong. On the other side, there are many scientists who are believers, Christians, who have contributed to the development of science. Albert the Great from the 13th century, the teacher of Thomas Aquinas, is considered to be first natural scientist. At the pinnacle of the science of 16th century, there is a Polish Catholic priest, Nicola Copernic, whose new aspect of the world was accepted with joy from the Pope about the heliocentric existence dedicated to Paul VI. Pope Gregor the 13th not only founded an institution with Catholic scientists, but also of others, about the reform of the calendar on the basis of scientific, not of those of belief. The old calendar was substituted by the new Gregorian calendar that exists to this very day. the establishment of the first libraries are the works of the popes. One of the great scientists, Isaac Newton, he was a great believer in himself, considered that all of his best accomplishments are the theological explanations of the Bible and not his scientific work from physics. The Croatian philosopher and scientist, Jesuit Roger Bošković, his theory of the power and structure of things founded his findings on belief in God, who created the world such as it is according to the measure of man. In the 20th century, the same idea has been brought forth by the representatives of the anthropic principle, considering that all of the natural laws are adapted to man. It is very little known that a Catholic priest, Gregor Mendel, by his laws of inheritance, had put in place the modern genetics and the great theory of the Pascal, the Big Bang, or the theory of the existence of the world was by George Lemaitre. It was possible that he was motivated by religious attitude that the universe is not from always, but that it was created at a given moment to start to spread. Einstein, after that, became the one who defended the element of the spreading of the universe. Many other examples could be used to show that the Church and Christianity did not try to block the development of science, but to the contrary. Now I would like to rest for a moment with a song.
Your name on high, Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. To save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way from the earth to the cross. My debt to pay from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on
Otkuda onda potiču ideje
So where the ideas come from about the century-old
i nazadne
conflict between the science and the conservative faith?
to su izmišljotine
These are made-up stories
18. stoljeća
of the
scientizma i ateizma
illumination and the scientism and of atheism, and then of the further
ateizmu i materializmu.
forms of materialism and idealism. Many of the idealistic elements have made it come to about
Natija priča o sukobu između znanosti i
the
crkve prije
story about the conflict between science and the church, especially the Catholic Church, and then between science and Christianity,
što se proširilo na
which spread to the general assertion of science and every
a to je slučaj
religion and faith,
Galileji.
and that is the situation of Galileo Galilei.
Tumačenje Galileja kao žrtve
The
znanosti
illuminating definition of Galileo was an actual falsity.
u slučaju Galileju.
In the situation of Galileo,
Nepravda potpuno krivog i zlonamjernog
it is important to be able to take a very good look so that there could be a correction of a completely wrong interpretation.
za svoje
Galilei,
tvrdoglavo inzistiranje na
for his hard-headed
imao
insistence of the
današnjim
establishment of Copernicum, he did not have any basis in the sense of the word. He could not even have it at that point in time.
nedvojbeni znanstveni dokaz za
The scientific
sunca potječe iz 1830
proof of the world revolving around the sun
više od 2 stoljeća
is more than 2 centuries old after Galileo tried to establish that it was the earth that was moving. So thus, the German scientist
što je ispravno rekao
Heisenberg
se odluka
said correctly that the decision of the Inquisition of 1616
dade opravdati.
can be actually justified of Galileo.
Paul Feyerabend
And Paul Feyerabend
je rekao
expressly said, and I cite,
crkva se u Galilejevo
the church in Galileo time
razuma od samog Galileja
had been closer to reason than Galileo himself
socijalne
and observed the ethical and sociological aspects of Galileo.
pozicionalna i pravedna
Its
i ona se
definition
opravdati.
and justification of Galileo was justifiable.
Slučaj Galilej nije
The situation of Galilei was not a conflict between science and Christianity, not even Christianity and
stjecaj nesretnih
the church,
ljudskih
but also the situation of unfortunate human situations, especially the character of Galilei and the situations in Europe at the time. The Protestants considered that the church teaching of the Catholic Church was not right in interpretation of the Bible. Galileo, on the basis of scientific arguments, had also reached theological arguments. So he became involved with the interpretation of the Bible. Catholic Church could not permit the Protestant complaint that a Protestant would be involved in interpretation of the Catholic teaching. And John Paul II is the one who had looked at this as well. Galilei was not the only one who had represented science at the time. Kepler, Theo Bracher, and many others were there who did not agree with Galilei. So, church was not in conflict with science. And what happened about Galileo was a complete falsification. It is not true that Inquisition tormented him. It is not true that he died as a martyr for science. It is not true that he said "Pulse move." Nonetheless, it is moving, etc. Galilei, to the end of his life, remained a good Catholic. In the time of Galilei, and afterwards, scientists did not reject God. In the 18th century, God became nothing more than an abstract idea of the Age of Illumination. He was no longer the God of Christianity, the living God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Many scientists of the 19th century have completely rejected the Christian God and deistic God and of the time of the Illumination. Why? Because any kind of a God represented the main obstacle to science, which was trying to accomplish great things in biology, starting to endlessly believing in its own power, thinking that it would come to absolute truth. And the base of that belief was the reductionism and the belief in scientific method. And that's where the ideology came about of scientific fundamentalism, of scientism. According to the scientific aspect, the world evolves only by strict deterministic aspects, where it's completely able to determine the past and the future of the world and of man. It is only a matter of the moment when science would be able to come to discover those laws, and then there would be absolutely no mystery and no limits to human knowledge. To all of the questions, there would become the possibility of an answer. This is a naive scientific optimism of 19th century science. In such a world of science, there was no place for God, because everything could be foreseen in a very strict way scientifically, and God was unnecessary, because in his place, deterministic science came to take place. Scientific determinism became thus a main paradigm, or the image, scientific image of the world, and became a scientific dogma. The conclusion was that faith was not connectable with science, and that their conflict is essential. With regards to this optimism, Einstein said, "It is possible that tomorrow we'll know a little bit more than we know today, but the true aspect of nature we will never know, never." And the last words of Ruđer Bošković were, "It is very little what we know. It is immeasurable what we don't know." Even though science itself of the 20th century, with the theory of relativity and the theory of complex deterministic chaos, finally destroyed scientism and determinism, like in the area of micro-world as in the macro-world. Even today, there exist the new scientists and atheists who are inclined to believe that science possesses all-encompassing knowledge. When science closes itself in itself, then is dogmatism, which perhaps is more dangerous than even the dogmatism of faith. Scientists more and more become aware that there are a multitude of questions from which it is visible that science is limited in its knowledge. And the scientists themselves, who in their areas of research could be very respectable researchers, do not have to be competent on the issues of faith. Even more so, they don't have to be competent than any other average person. So that for a serious scientist to be able to come into a public debate with regards to science and faith, he in fact would have to be one that knows religion, theology and philosophy. The greatest number of today's scientists know very little in this region, if at all. In addition to scientism, the conflict between science and faith is also defended by fideists, who literally interpret the religious books of great religions, considering that they contain all truth, even scientific truth. The official Catholic Church does not accept this, either fideism or scientism, or the idea that science and faith are completely separated from each other and independent of each other. And besides, it defends the dialogue between religion and science. In encyclical Fides et Ratio, Faith and Reason, John Paul II says that faith and science are two wings that enable man to come to get on the world. And Pope Benedict XVI, during his visit to Croatia in 2011, said in Zagreb that Ruđer Bošković is an excellent example of a great scientist and priest believer who shows the complementarity of faith, reason and science. The Catholic Church expressly states that scientific theory cannot be in opposition to faith, because everything in the world takes place in accord with natural law which God made. There's still the question that remains: would true scientists have to be atheists, as today militant scientists tell us? If this would be so, then we'd have to forget basically the entire history of science. The greatest scientists in the history were religious, and for the greatest part Christian. So also Einstein said, and I cite, "I belong among the most profound religious men. My thinking is that every more profound reflection in the area of science comes from a profound religious sense. Real scientific workers are only the ones that are profoundly religious people." It is very difficult among the great scientific minds to find them without a profound religious sense. It is not possible to envision a great scientist without being imbued by great faith, and the situation could be seen in image. Science without faith is lame. Faith without science is blind. Science and faith, according to some, can be without each other, but man cannot be without both. Niall said that religious contributes to the harmony of life of the community. And Max Planck says that between religion and nature, natural science, we cannot find any opposition but complete accord in the decisive points. Religious and natural science are not exclusive, but they complement each other and condition each other. At the end, a question could be asked: who in fact tries to prevent scientific research? When the theses are spreading about the intolerance in the church against the progressive science, then we have to see that there are very few aspects of proof for that. What in fact is true? Let us just set out certain historic situations. Theory of relativity began in the 20th century and did not support the materialistic image of the world. And for a while, they were very dangerous for the regime. They were forbidden and persecuted in communistic countries, especially in the Soviet Russia. Between 1920 and 60, it was persecuted in the major ideology. Just was Lysenko, director of the Institute for Genetics of the Soviet Academy of Science. Many people who on the area of genetics were represented, was physically liquidated, or in the best situation ended up in prison. A similar situation was also in the countries of the ex-Eastern Bloc that were under the political and ideological influence of Soviet Union, partly also in Croatia as well. This also confirms that faith is not in accordance with science, but that atheism is not in accord with science. Also in the democratic world is not much different in the 20th century. Pope Benedict XVI, on the 17th of January 2008, needed to speak at the Roman University La Sapienza, which means wisdom, in Rome, but he did not, because 67 professors and the thousands of the others had signed a petition preventing the Pope speaking at the university. Why? It was Ratzinger's dissertation in Parma, a decade earlier, where he only cited Austrian philosopher Feyerabend, who affirmed that the process against Galileo was justified and reasonable. This was enough to cause the rage against the new thinking philosophers, thinking that this is an offense, that a theologian who would speak about science and faith. What a modern scientific inquisition. Here we cannot but also mention the ethical and moral stands of scientists, of moral headings. Many of the questions are with regards to this. Are scientists more moral than others? Does science make people and others moral and better? All of the abuse of the current science shows that some of the scientists and some of the organized structures do not care in the first place to true science or truth or morals. That is what is concerning. Science possesses knowledge, but does not have wisdom. For life, we need knowledge, but even more so wisdom. This entire reflection of science and faith shows that the greatest scientists in our history did not have a problem with science and believing God, nor did their faith stop them from being involved with science. Putting in accord science and faith is with those who are pseudoscientists, as before, so today. And if a single word we have to conclude, then we could say that man's existence, his advancement, that for his existence, advancement, both science and faith are necessary. That objective investigation of science and religion demands a fundamental knowledge of both of those regions of human spirituality. That is why we have to have a dialogue between the two in mutual respect and tolerance. Thank you.
Profesor je uvijek profesor.
A professor is always a professor. I want to thank him because in this short time gave a summary of science and faith. The true believer must be both a scientist and otherwise. Professor, thank you so much.